channel where we bring you history 24/7, 365 days a year, or 366 if it's a leap year. This is History Hefner at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, and we are doing our live stream lecture today. Our first one, well, since last week, we do these every Sunday, and of course, you can vote starting on Friday or Saturday what live stream lecture topic you would like to hear about. You can do that by voting here on YouTube. And if you enjoy history, social studies, if you're just joining us for the first time, please be sure to like and subscribe. If you're coming back, please please make sure to subscribe. 50 yards away. Let me see. Okay, good. Sorry, I think it's better now. I turned off my my headphones. But welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and our live stream lecture. This topic today will be Ronald Reagan. We'll be talking about that in just a second. If you like history and social studies and you're just joining us, thank you for joining us. Like Sawai, you might be from India. I really appreciate seeing you and having you here. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you have subscribed, please like us. Follow us on those social media handles in the chat. Becoming a Friendly Neighborhood Historian is as easy as liking and subscribing. And we are going to be going, I don't know if we'll go the full hour, but we're going to be talking about the life and legacy of President Ronald Reagan. You guys get to vote on this. You voted on YouTube for the live stream topic as you did last week. And this week it's Ronald Reagan. I really hope you guys really enjoy it. And we'll see what we do next week. It might very well be Bolshevism or something like that. We've got my wonderful moderators, Harry and Hars, in the chat. Corazon, great to see you. At 1:40 a.m. So Y is here. I appreciate you being so faithful and joining us. So yes, if you haven't liked the live yet, please do so. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so as well. Why do you think? Because it's boring not to, in my opinion. We'll see if we have time for questions at the end. I'm not sure what that will look like, but yeah, hopefully, let's see here. We're gonna go way back in my feed. Okay, we're going to go back to talking about Ronald Reagan. So last week we talked about one of the Democrats' most famous presidents. Today we're going to talk about the Republicans' probably their most famous president, other than Abraham Lincoln, and that's going to be, of course, Ronald Reagan, probably the most well-known Republican president of the 20th century, the inspiration for modern conservatism. It would be impossible to talk about Ronald Reagan without talking about the rise of conservatism in the United States and how Reagan basically created a shift towards the right that has still been fought. So, of course, Ronald Reagan, there you go, you see him there. Of course, he was a famous actor, a radio producer. He was a television star. He did all sorts of things before basically revamping himself as a politician, becoming one of the most prolific political figures in American history, being both the governor of California and the president of the United States. And we're going to talk about all of that. I'm really looking forward to all of these discussions with you. You can get a good look of him there. Well known for his charisma, good looks, and charm, probably dyed hair, but it doesn't matter. Reagan was a likable, well thought out speaker, best known as the great communicator. There he is when he's a little bit younger. I think that's when he ran for governor of California. But Reagan's story starts off in Tampico, Illinois in 1911. His father was an alcoholic who struggled with that problem. Reagan became an outspoken advocate for responsibility and not drinking. He actually inspired several other celebrities based on his moderation not to give up their alcoholism. But Reagan got his hatred of alcoholism and substance abuse from his father, who was an alcoholic. His mother was a very devoted Christian, and they kind of grew up in a very small town area in Illinois. And Reagan was charismatic. He was athletic. I believe he played football like Gerald Ford, but he never got to the heights that Gerald Ford did. He was a lifeguard who liked to swim a lot. He was very athletic, very charismatic, very good looking, and very popular. Ronnie Reagan, as he was known. His middle name was Wilson. I think that was his mother's maiden name that he was given. Reagan, I'm trying to remember where he went to college. Oh, I always forget. I think it was Eureka. Trying to remember. But Reagan really gets started in the 1930s. He hosts a radio program. He hosts a radio broadcast. He has good speaking skills. He's very charismatic. He is very well known as the great communicator, and this is a legacy that will follow him the rest of his life, especially during his presidency. His eloquence, his good speaking skills, his ability to debate well, his humor will all be huge helps to him when he becomes president of the United States and governor of California. So this is the early mid-30s. This is during the Great Depression, but this is also during what's what's known as the golden age of Hollywood. Hollywood has become an extremely popular location for many people to go and get away from their problems, whether they're going to movie theaters or listening to radio dramas. The entertainment industry is booming in the 1920s and 30s, even during the Great Depression, because people would rather deal with their problems in the world by going to the movie theaters and watching a double feature than actually, because there's very little recourse that they have to fix the problems in their daily lives. So the studio era is really popular. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Warner Brothers, these are some of the big studios at the time, and they're extraordinarily popular all across the nation, and they are big hubs for good-looking, energetic, and professional people with great speaking skills and abilities, as well as people who have a background in radio who are considered to be good-looking. And Ronald Reagan kind of fits this mold, so he gets involved in the moving pictures and that industry in the mid to late 1930s, and he eventually carves out a pretty successful career. Now, obviously, he's not Clark Gable, Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant, any of the big-name celebrities of that era. A lot of people can say that Reagan was just a B actor. This isn't true. Reagan was in a bunch of big budget blockbuster movies. He was a leading man or second leading man in a lot of those films, and eventually his peak was the late 30s to the late 40s, where he was actually a pretty well-known name, a pretty popular celebrity, and a very successful actor. Never considered the greatest actor of all time. Won't make any top 100 great acting lists when you consider the talent around him then, before, and afterwards. But definitely a name in Hollywood. And to make a name for yourself as a leading man in Hollywood during the 1940s, when you've got such great heavyweights, like I mentioned before, Cary Grant, Gary Cooper, you've got people like that. Reagan actually carves out an extremely successful career. It's really hard to make it in the industry, and it was no less hard 80 years ago than it is today. Reagan made advertisements for the military. He really wasn't engaged in military service in the Third or Second World War, whatever you want to call it. So Reagan was really influential in he gets his name out there for being a patriot, for being politically interested, for being invested in political dialogue, invested in patriotic causes. He's very pro-American. He's very pro-America's involvement in the war. Making advertisements for the military is a big thing of him. He makes several war pictures. I mean, just like all the other big stars of the era, like Cary Grant and John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart and stuff like that. And Reagan is also married. His first wife is Jane Wyman, who's an extremely successful actress, more successful as an actress than Reagan is as an actor, more of a leading lady than Reagan is as a leading man, and a career that lasts a bit longer. She's an Oscar winner, really, really renowned and popular actress. It's quite interesting at the time. Reagan, growing up in kind of the Midwest, comes from a Democratic hub, so Reagan is a liberal Democrat during his earlier days. Although he is a patriot, he sympathizes with a lot of liberal causes. He's supportive of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, which we talked about a lot last week. And like many celebrities of that era, he is at least very sympathetic to democratic causes. But he is not on board with any sort of communism. The word about communism infiltrating the entertainment industry will obviously lead to the government investigating it in the 1950s, both the House and the U.S. Senate. The House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, and other organizations will do what they can to pin communism on certain people in the entertainment industry. And Reagan is a collaborator with the government to find out who the communists are who are working in the entertainment industry, be they actors, writers, producers, set crew, anyone in Hollywood who's got sympathies or affiliations to the Communist Party, who refuses to testify and name names of how the communist apparatus works to infiltrate and influence media, particularly television, movies, and the rising form of television, movies, and radio, is on the chopping block. And Reagan is a participant in helping the government name and turn over a lot of these people. And this being despite the fact that he is a liberal Democrat. He also becomes the president of the Screen Actors Guild. He is elected to this position. This is the first position he's elected to. So he's not only a popular actor, he is also clearly has an interest in politics, clearly has an interest in America, in American traditions and values, but he's also very interested in the workings and the management of Hollywood. He's interested in the unions and understanding the unions. Obviously, the Screen Actors Guild is one of the biggest unions in the United States. So there's a lot to say there. By the way, I'm not answering any questions yet. I will probably later if we have time. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and a happy Sunday to all of you as we talk about Ronald Reagan and his legacy here for our live stream like at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. We have a live stream lecture every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, so if you're enjoying it, please make sure to drop that like and subscribe, all of that great stuff. So what happens next? Reagan's marriage falls apart, and one of the reasons his marriage falls apart, interestingly enough, is the fact that Reagan is interested in politics, his wife is not interested in politics. She's a Republican and he's a liberal Democrat. This is an interesting combination. Wyman will remain a Republican. Obviously, Reagan is not going to remain a Democrat. And I believe she voted for him both times when he ran for president and when he ran for governor of California, despite their split. Reagan's career starts to take a turn in the late 40s and early 50s. He doesn't get as many of the big offers. He's more interested in the inner workings of Hollywood. He's cooperating with the federal government when it comes to naming communists and communist sympathizers in Hollywood. He's the president of the Screen Actors Guild. This leaves less and less time for him to actually be actively involved in making movies, blockbuster picks and stuff like that. So earlier movies like Knute Rockne All-American and King's Row are followed up by more what we would call B-tier films that are not as popular with a smaller audience. He kind of goes from being a semi B plus star to, or an A minus star to a B star, a solid B star. He makes a couple of different movies at this time, and he meets a young actress named Nancy Davis. Davis is trying to make her way in Hollywood, never really receives any fame or recognition, but Reagan falls head over heels for her, and he eventually marries her. And this is, of course, Nancy Reagan, who is perhaps his greatest support and his biggest ally. Of course, you can see them there. Quite a very loving couple. Reagan himself was known for straying, especially with Jane Wyman. I don't know how much philandering he did with Nancy Reagan. I talked about FDR philandering, so I'm going to talk about Ronald Reagan. Their marriage seems to have been a pretty happy one. Both Nancy and him had kind of a sketchy past when it came to romance, both with his divorce, which was very taboo in the late 40s and early 50s, and with her rumors of her being involved in the casting couch to elevate her career by having relations with leading people in Hollywood to further her clout and influence. And Reagan, known for being kind of a Lothario and flirting and sleeping around during the height of his Hollywood days. But from all accounts of them as a married couple, they seem to have been an extremely popular and happy married couple. They're a popular first couple. A lot of people really saw them as elegant, as dashing. She was very supportive of him. He was very supportive of her when she was first lady and her effort to say no to drugs and stuff like that. By the way, if you want to learn more about her and the other first ladies of our country, follow us on Patreon, where you can get, of course, there's a paywall. Yes, I know, I'm sorry. But there is my series on the first ladies. So if you're interested in learning about who Nancy Davis, Reagan, and all the other great first ladies of our country are, go and check that out. We're almost done there. Hillary Rodham Clinton is our next one, which I'll probably do today or tomorrow. So yeah, please check that out. So Reagan is transitioning from a star to being more in the public eye. He's obviously interested in politics. He's interested in the way the country is run. He runs the Screen Actors Guild. And despite the fact that he's been a Democrat, he's starting to really have cast a leery eye towards the Democrats. Many liberal Democrats, especially in Hollywood, absolutely hate communism and have no affinity for it. Reagan is one of these, but a lot of Democrats start to turn to the right as they see what they see as an infiltration of Hollywood and other parts of the media with communist and communist sympathizers. Now, why is the United States so worried about communism at this time and even now today? Well, a huge reason is obviously after the end of the last World War in the 1940s, the United States and the Soviet Union are at odds because of the Cold War. So there's a great fear of communism and communist spies from the Soviet Union influencing U.S. culture, media, and government. So there's fears of communism in every sector of life, be it Hollywood, be it television, be it radio, be any form of media, be it the press, be it the public office, be it politics, be it the U.S. government. So there's a fear of communism all throughout the United States, and Reagan develops the reputation as being a Cold Warrior. A Cold Warrior is somebody who fights communism in every phase of their life as much as possible, usually on a governmental front. This is a moniker that will define his entire political career. So what happens next? Let me go forward. So Reagan is started in 1954. He works. He gets a job hosting a TV show, kind of a variety show on NBC. Variety shows were very popular in the 1950s and 60s. This is the GE Electric Hour. He is the host of that from 1954 to 1962. And he works for NBC. And during this time, he is going to move further and further to the right. And by the end of the show's run in 1962, which is Reagan's last big acting or television role, his career is kind of winding down at this point. So he's kind of turned to television, which is what a lot of actors who were popular in the 40s do in the 1950s and 60s, who don't have the sticking points of a Cary Grant or someone like that. So Reagan's going to turn more to television. He's going to do the GE Electric Hour until 1962. And then by 1962, Ronald Reagan is a firm Republican. He is no longer a Democrat, and he is interested in eyeing a political future. There have been actors who are interested in politics. One of them is George Murphy, but Reagan will be the predominant force of a politician, of a actor using the skills, charisma, and charm of acting to enter the political theater. In 1964, Reagan steps onto the national stage at the Republican convention and gives a famous speech called "A Time for Choosing." This is seen as Reagan's coming out for politics, and he is supporting the conservative candidate Barry Goldwater, who is nominated by the Republicans. Now, here's just a quick aside. The Republican Party in the 20th century, up until that point, had been pretty moderate for the most part. It had been a center-right party that had kind of just been, the Democrats aren't doing this right, so we're going to do it, but a little differently. You'd come off the presidency of Dwight Eisenhower in the 50s, who was very opposed to communism and even built up the military-industrial complex to do so, but was also sympathetic towards civil rights, expanding domestic welfare programs like Social Security, and other things. These Republicans were not heavy on lowering taxes or cutting back regulation, which is something that is typical of conservatives. So they were kind of a moderate center-right Republican Party that was interested in, yes, in embracing more capitalistic features, fighting against communism, but not being overwhelming in their belief of lower taxes for the wealthy. They were not exactly the Republicans of Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge, who had cut taxes on the wealthy during the Roaring '20s. These were Republicans who were a little bit more moderate in their opinions, and the conservative movement seemed to be in retreat as the New Deal was hailed as a massive success, especially afterwards in the early 1940s and 50s. So you go into the night. So the Republicans of the 1940s and 50s are seemingly kind of trying to be more moderate. They aren't really condemning the New Deal. They're not going to fight against Roosevelt's policies. They're just going to give a more conservative option towards that. They're obviously going to embrace patriotism and a cultural side. Reagan is not of this cloth. Reagan is cut from the cloth of Calvin Coolidge, Robert Taft, who's a Republican senator, yes, related to William Howard Taft, who's extremely I think he was, who's really conservative, and Barry Goldwater. Now, Goldwater, we know now, is more of a libertarian. If anything, if he were in Congress today, he'd be a libertarian, but he was a senator from Arizona. He had conservative policies. He hated communism. He was a big Cold Warrior. He was interested in cutting taxes and government spending. He was interested in cutting social programs. He had opposed the civil rights legislation. This was a really unpopular take for him in 1964, except in the South. And Johnson absolutely crushes Goldwater in this landslide, despite Reagan's best efforts as one of the leading Hollywood celebrities to vote Republican. This comes with other famous celebrities like John Wayne, Cary Grant, and Jimmy Stewart, all being big Republicans. Many Democrats are in Hollywood too, like Paul Newman and Gregory Peck, but none of them enter the political scene like Ronald Reagan does. So Reagan, despite this huge loss and a huge blow seemingly to the conservative movement, Reagan is still a popular, likable actor who speaks well. His speech is very, very well received, and he believes that basically the Republicans are not winning, not because they're too bullish on the Cold War, but because they're not bullish enough. If they could really press the idea of conservative values, fiscal responsibility, cutting government regulation, and fighting communism wherever and however it goes, then they could actually really get far. And that is Reagan's justification for entering the 1966 presidential gubernatorial race for California. This is the same race against the same governor, Pat Pat Brown, that he had lost, that Richard Nixon had lost in 1962 and had seemingly ended his political career. Reagan is popular. He's more likable than Nixon. He's better. He's more well-spoken. He doesn't have the political baggage that Nixon has, and he's able to win in a convincing fashion, about 57% of the vote in California, which is seen as one of the more liberal states in the country, although still more Republican than it certainly is today. So Ronald Reagan's political career goes from being the head of a Screen Actors Guild, an a Cold Warrior, and an active voice in conservative politics, to being the governor of California. Now, Reagan isn't a smashingly good conservative when he is the governor of California. He raises taxes. He passes one of the more liberal abortion laws in the country. He also passes no-fault divorce, and a lot of conservatives who love to tout Reagan's record do not really look at his California time. But dealing with a California that is more liberal than probably most of the rest of the country, Reagan was probably more than anything just trying to wheel and deal and compromise in order to get what he could. Reagan is underrated for his ability to be a bipartisan actor because of his more isolating political rhetoric. So the truth of the matter is Reagan isn't really the shining conservative that he will be during his presidency, at least by most accounts, when he is governor of California. Although, despite this, he takes a very hardline stance against anti-war protests, against student protesters. He really puts the kibosh on a lot of them. He goes personally to the universities and a lot of other stuff. By 1970, he's reelected as governor. He opts not to seek for a third term in 1974, and that is because he has his eyes on a much bigger prize. He's obviously the governor of the most populous state in the country. He is extremely likable and popular, and he's gone from being an actor with liberal Democratic leanings to being a staunch conservative, and he is interested in moving the Republican Party to the right, and he will get his chance to do this. He teases a run for president in 1968, but Richard Nixon gets the nomination. Nixon wins and implements a similar semi-conservative agenda to that of Dwight Eisenhower. This agenda is continued with Nixon's successor, Gerald Ford, but Ford was not elected to be vice president or president and only takes over because of Nixon's Watergate scandal, forcing him to resign in August of 1974. So the Republican Party, despite the fact that they have an incumbent president, doesn't really seem to have a clear choice in 1976. Ford represents the moderate Republican angle that has been successful with presidents like Eisenhower and Nixon, but he has obviously not been elected. There's a lot of questions about corruption. There's a lot of questions about Washington insiders, but there is somebody on the outside who is seeking presidential fame for himself, and that is Mr. Ronald Reagan, who is now coming off of 2 successful terms as the governor of California, and he launches a primary challenge to President Ford from the right. This is the penultimate time that a incumbent president has actually been challenged actively and pretty successfully from his own party. He will do this from the right to Ford in 1976, and Jimmy Carter will do Ted Kennedy will do this to Jimmy Carter from the left in 1980. Reagan wins several primaries. He becomes quite popular. He obviously is pushing the party to the right. Him and Ford do not get on very well at first, but it's close, but no cigar. Ford's incumbency factor and his longtime experience, especially in Congress, kind of speak volumes, and he receives the nomination at the convention in 1976. He will go on to lose a very close election to Jimmy Carter, who is seen as a Washington outsider, but clearly Reagan has made his impact on the Republican Party and is here to stay. In 1980, he will run again. This time, Carter's presidency has not gone particularly well. There's been economic downturn. There's stagflation, where you have a stagnant economy that is not growing well. You do not have wages going up, but you have an increasing amount of inflation. You have higher unemployment. It's basically a spin down economically. You have an energy crisis. You have oil embargoes. You have the Shah of Iran falling and regime change not favoring the United States so badly that the new Iranian Islamic Republic seizes hostages in 1979 that Carter cannot successfully get back. And so the United States Carter is unpopular, and Reagan enters the fray. He's likable, he's charismatic, he's charming, and he uses what his enemies call his slickness and what his friends call his charm to be able to win over his opponents and to win over the American people. And he is an excellent debater, he's an excellent speaker, and this is where people will get the nickname for him, the Great Communicator. Reagan has successfully pushed the Republican Party to the right. He has made it a more conservative, semi-libertarian party. And although this message has not been very popular in many circles for a long time, and seemingly was not a winning formula for the Republicans since at least the 1920s, Reagan wins the presidency, and he wins it in convincing fashion. People are really tired of Jimmy Carter. They see him as incompetent. Reagan promises an economic revival, and he comes up with a new economic system to promote that will basically change the way people view economics, at least on the right in America, for the foreseeable future. And this is called, as I look for the picture of it, can't find the right picture of it. This is called, I'll just use this one. This is called Reaganomics. And Reaganomics comes in with one of his big tax cuts that comes in the beginning of 81 and 82. The Reagan tax cuts work like this, basically. The Reaganomics work like this. And nobody has ever called it trick. No one of his followers, none of his devotees, no one on the right who influenced Reagan, libertarian-like economists like Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman actually use these terms, but it has been called disparagingly trickle-down economics. But it's more complex than that. Reagan's basic model of how the economy would work is this. You cut taxes on the top earners in the economy. They have more wealth to spend. They invest more in businesses. They prop up the economy. They also will pay more in revenue, which actually turns out to be true. In the 1920s, 60s, and 1980s, as well as in the 2000s, the tax revenue increased when the taxes were cut. This is something that goes all the way back to Andrew Mellon, Warren Harding's Secretary of Treasury, who originally posted this idea in 1921. Reagan comes up with a revised version of it where basically the wealthy receive a tax cut and then are able to invest in new businesses, produce more revenue, and people will get more jobs. The trickle-down notion from it is that the people who, when they produce more jobs, when they invest in more businesses, when they grow their opportunities, that will raise the interest and economic opportunities of the people underneath them, the next classes of people. And so the middle class will all of a sudden have more wealth. They will move up. They will become more economically prosperous, and they will pay more in taxes. This introduces a new standard that many people believed was regressive. The rich are paying less, at least percentage-wise, while making more and more money for themselves. Despite the fact that the revenue is up for them, tax revenue comes up from them because they're making more money and their rates are actually, they pay more even though the rates are lower. It also means that the middle class will be paying more in taxes because their taxes aren't going anywhere. Now, I don't know how much of it, I'm not 100% sure about this. I don't know how much of these tax cuts actually impacted the rest of the middle class and the working class in the sense of lowering the taxes on people who were poor. I don't believe that those taxes demonstrably went up, but the share of paying for them did go up, and that is why people consider this to be a regressive tax formula. Reagan also hopes that this renewed amount of tax revenue will cut the national deficit. As more and more rich people pay more, and as more people move up and are able to pay more in taxes because of new businesses and opportunities created by the wealthy, these people will pay more in taxes, and this will eventually bring the deficit down. This fails miserably. And the reason it fails miserably is not because it doesn't actually work in producing more revenue. More revenue does become available, especially from the wealthy themselves, of all people. The problem is that Reagan has a two-pronged approach to how he will solve the major issues, the economic stagnation of the 1970s and détente. Reagan believes that détente, the policy by which the Americans had tried to create kind of a peaceful coexistence with the Soviet Union, is garbage. He doesn't believe that the Soviet Union follows any of these ideas. He doesn't trust the Soviets at all, and he goes back to his history as a Cold Warrior. He absolutely hates the Soviet Union and believes that it should be destroyed. He doesn't believe that peaceful coexistence works with an authoritarian dictatorship. So Reagan believes that the best way to destroy the Soviet Union is rapid economic growth combined with rapid military spending. That the cuts in the deficit, as well as the cutting of government spending and the rolling back of regulations, will not actually create a smaller deficit and allow the Americans to pay down their growing debt, but will allow the Americans to pay for a deficit that is focused on military spending rather than social programs. Rather than focusing on social programs like the war on poverty, which Reagan famously is quoted as saying, "We fought a war on poverty and poverty won," Reagan believes that the spending should be focused on the military because the Soviets can't keep up with America's domestic manufacturing and with military. You can't have guns or butter. This is an old economic adage that basically you're either going to focus on domestic issues or you're going to focus on foreign issues via your military. Reagan tries to do both. It doesn't work in every single regard, but some things are actually quite impressive. The Americans do increase their military spending tremendously during Reagan's 8 years in the presidency, which puts pressure on the Soviet Union to do the same. The Soviet Union doesn't do as well as the Americans do with this, and America tends to be, and a lot of the economic issues from the 70s actually do see some resolution and improvement. An early recession in Reagan's administration is in 1981 to 1982 is blamed on him. An economic boost in 83 and 84 will help out the economy and help out Reagan's reelection chances. By the end of his presidency, the economy has started to go downhill again, and Reagan doesn't really get blamed for this that much, but he could be as well. So again, I am not saying one way, I'm not saying these are my political beliefs or economic ideas. I am saying what actually happened and what Reagan wanted to do. This is the program. I explained the New Deal. I'm explaining Reaganomics. It's cut spending, cut regulations, cut taxes, get more revenue. You see the improvement of businesses and the growth of the economy, which will help the middle class, who will pay more in taxes as well. And that money that we use from cutting the deficit will now be redirecting from social programs and cutting regulations will be redirected to military spending to put pressure on the Soviet Union. If people don't like Reagan's domestic policies and other problems with Reagan's administration, such as the AIDS crisis, which Reagan's slow response there is a problem, which I will explain in a minute. A lot of people do want to give Reagan credit for this policy, and it's hard to see, but it's we win, they lose. Reagan doesn't mess around with the Soviet Union. He doesn't consider them an equal threat to the United States. He doesn't consider them an equal superpower. He sees them as the evil empire. And this is and a lot of the people, especially in the media, really do not like this. They have been used to a decade of détente and this idea of we can get along together and work together to make the world a better place. Why can't we just leave them alone and let them do what they want? This started to crack before Reagan with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the 1970s. But Reagan's going to put pressure on the United States, on the Soviet Union, and he's going to be very bullish in his threats towards them. His key way of trying to do this is creating a way in which the mutually assured destruction, which had been the doctrine of the Soviet Union, had been the doctrine of the Cold War, where basically the way mutually assured destruction had worked since the 1950s was the Soviets have nuclear weapons, the U.S. has nuclear weapons. If the U.S. uses their nuclear weapons, the Soviets will use theirs, and both sides will be destroyed, and vice versa. So both sides had deterred each other from a nuclear war or from a ground-land war because of the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Reagan goes back to the beginning of the Cold War and thinks the U.S. were the only ones with the nuclear weapons until 1949. If the U.S. had a way of destroying or deflecting enemy nuclear weapons and missiles, even intercontinental ballistic missiles, then the United States could actually really hold all the power over the Soviet Union. So he comes up with an idea, and it's been batted around for a while. He is teased and mocked mercilessly for this, although the Soviets actually believe there's some teeth to it. It's basically just a hollow threat and a bluff to some extent. It's called Strategic Defense Initiative. It is mockingly called Star Wars. Reagan has put on Time magazine with him wearing the Darth Vader helmet. In the midst of the Star Wars movies coming out in the late 70s and early 80s, a lot of people think this is pure science fiction, and to some extent it is. The idea is that Reagan wants lasers in space to be put up by satellites that will shoot down missiles before they can ever attack the United States. This really doesn't, this falls on deaf ears in the United States. However, the Soviet Union is more worried about it than Reagan is more worried about it than they seem. This leads to Reagan basically being able to use it as a bluff to intimidate his opponents that he is working with. The various different Soviet heads of state are extremely opposed to Reagan and are ready to answer his militancy with equal militancy. Yuri Andropov, I forget the name of the other one, and of course Leonid Brezhnev. But they keep dying in quick succession of each other until 1984, when Reagan will finally get somebody who's a little bit more pliable and who will agree to talk and listen with him, and that is Mikhail Gorbachev. He is young, he is reformative, he starts to reform the Soviet economy, he opens up Soviet culture, and basically, in order to save communism, his basic idea is that the Soviet Union needs to go to the drawing table with the United States. We need to de-escalate these militant intentions from the Reagan administration. We need to maybe give them some of the things they want, and we need a more open and reformed system where we can have more freedom of speech, because the old wave system has stagnated us as well. The Soviets went through an even worse period of stagnation in the 1970s than the United States had, economically and politically. So détente seemingly is dead. Reagan's aggression has really worried a lot of people. The military buildup is worrying a lot of the Soviets. Gorbachev comes in and starts to de-escalate tensions, something that Reagan is looking forward to. Their first meetings don't go so well, but in 1987 at Reykjavik, they eventually reach a big missile reduction agreement, where basically both sides agree to trim the amount of nuclear missiles that they do. And this time, according to Reagan at least, the Soviets actually follow through with doing it. So Reagan's aggressive stance towards the Soviet Union, his pressure on them, cannot be done alone. He relies on political allies like Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who is equally opposed to communism, an extremely conservative, an even more economically conservative version of pro-market economics or supply-side economics, Reaganomics, goes on in Great Britain. You have conservatives in West Germany, France, and of course the Pope, who is a Pole, who is condemning communism, really putting pressure from Western Europe and the United States on Eastern Europe, the Soviet bloc countries, and the Soviet Union itself. And Reagan is going to capitalize on this and use his new alliances, as well as the pliability of Mikhail Gorbachev, to put pressure on the Soviet Union to de-escalate their control over their satellite states. The Soviets continue to get their rears handed to them in Afghanistan, and by 1989, that war has ended in absolute disaster. So, Reagan, capitalizing on the differences, on the decline of the Soviet Union, decides to give probably the most famous speech in the Cold War. In 1987, he goes to the Berlin Wall, where 26 years before, President Kennedy had stood when it had first been built, blocking people from East Berlin from escaping to the West. And Reagan gives an extremely famous speech in which he demands that Mikhail Gorbachev, if he values peace and freedom, which he said he does, will tear down this wall. That's one of the most famous lines from an American president, just like the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Reagan enters the echelons of greatest presidential sayings by this. Whatever you think of Ronald Reagan, his ability to communicate is probably something that is not really easy to attack. You can attack his domestic policy, you can undermine his influence in ending the Cold War for various historical reasons and facts and all of that, but Reagan's speech making, his ability to communicate, really puts him on a high level with presidents like Lincoln and Washington and FDR. Whatever you think of these presidents and whatever you think of what they've done, their ability to speak and communicate to the people in a way that people understand is really popular. Reagan has his problems, for sure. The economic prosperity, the ability of the middle class to rise up, the ability to cut the deficit with more revenue, especially with such monstrous amounts of spending on the military, does not happen. And obviously the AIDS crisis is a huge black eye in Reagan's face as well. Despite the fact that him and his wife Nancy are very open towards sympathy towards gay people in their personal lives, Reagan falls into a moral political quandary with the rise of the AIDS crisis and his slow response to it, despite the fact that one of his best friends is Rock Hudson, the actor who dies of AIDS and was a Reagan supporter. But Reagan and the government kind of have a slower response towards this. There really isn't the rapid response that is necessary for an epidemic that is killing tens of thousands of gay men. The Reagans, needing the votes of the moral majority and the religious right, which is ascendant at this time, turn very much a blind eye to this in some ways, and do not do as much as they possibly could to keep gay men from dying of AIDS. Of course, this disease will eventually spread to straight men and to women as well, but obviously it is a particular issue that is particularly affecting gay men who have a particular stigma because they are developing AIDS at rapid rates in the early 1980s. So, the reason Reagan is, despite personal feelings perhaps being more sympathetic, the reason Reagan is is not as open to dealing with this epidemic as much as possible is because of this man, Jerry Falwell. Jerry Falwell is a religious leader. He's a maybe our FDR talk was 2 weeks ago. Now I think about it, but please go watch the FDR talk. If you think I'm being too nice to Reagan, I'm trying to be as fair as possible to both presidents. This is Jerry Falwell. Jerry Falwell was the founder of Liberty University in Virginia. He is a leader in the Southern Baptist Convention, and he basically comes up with this idea that the evangelical Christians, people who follow non-denominational churches, Southern Baptists, and people who are not part of the real mainline Protestant denominations and are certainly not Catholics, have to have all Christians really, need to have as much of an involvement as possible in the moral culture as is going on. So the moral culture provides certain issues. The biggest issue in the 1970s with the Roe v. Wade decision is abortion and reproductive rights, and the religious right will continue to be opposed to this and fight against it all the way to this day. Another thing they are opposed to is the rise of the gay rights movement, which is also going on in the 1970s. Falwell and many of his followers basically believe that they need to throw their support behind the right wing because the right wing is open to pro-life policies and does not want to give more rights to gay people, does not want gay people coming out of the closet and things like that. And Reagan relies on white evangelicals, on the moral majority, on the religious right, on Jerry Falwell and his followers to support him. They are part of what's called the Reagan Coalition. The Reagan Coalition includes economic conservatives, religious conservatives, kind of coming together and forming the basis of the modern conservative section of the Republican Party, as well as moderate Democrats who believe that the Democrat Party left them behind. One of Reagan's most famous statements is, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party, it left me." And Reagan surrounds himself with celebrities who support him who were former Democrats like Frank Sinatra and Glenn Ford, interestingly enough. So Reagan has built a coalition of former Democrats, of moderates, of economic conservatives, of libertarian-like thinking people, and of religious moral majority people. He has not built a coalition that involves gay people, so he does not have as much interest in actually solving those issues, despite especially his wife's personal sympathies towards them. This is part of the problem with Reagan's administration, is this continual need to respond to people who are clearly have created this coalition and can move out of it whenever they wanted so that they can secure votes, be it the religious majority, the moral majority, the economic conservatives, the cold warriors, whoever they might be. Reagan has got them all together and has reshaped the Republican Party, making it the party of the conservatives, but that has come at a cost with a coalition that will turn on him if he does not keep his promises. Does that sound familiar? Because it is. It happens all the time in American politics. FDR did the same thing when he refused to pass anti-lynching legislation. So, interestingly enough, all of these problems, increased deficit spending, the AIDS crisis, and other things, do not deter from Reagan's popularity. Heightened tensions with the Soviet Union do not deter from Reagan's popularity. And in 1984, he wins in a huge landslide against Carter's former vice president, Walter Mondale, and like FDR, one of the biggest landslides in American history. This one includes all 50 states. There's only 2 presidents to win over 500 electoral votes since that we've had 50 states. It's Nixon in 72 and it's Reagan in 84. So this is one of the biggest landslides. He wins 57% of the popular vote, or 58% of the popular vote, which is huge considering the fact that right now it's like 50, 49, 49, 48, whatever. So there's a lot going on here. Reagan obviously has a lot of popularity behind him, and like many presidents, his second term isn't going to be as glamorous as his first. The economy does do pretty well. The Reykjavik talks, the Berlin Wall speech, 1986, 1987, Reagan's going to remain pretty popular and have a lot going for him. Another big problem in his administration is really going to hurt him, though, and that is the Iran-Contra scandal. Reagan had supported a group called the Contras. So Nicaragua had a communist revolution in the 1980s, which the CIA and everyone else in the Reagan administration, which was very against communism, was trying to oppose. The Cold War is still going on, so there's this idea that you have to oppose communism wherever it comes from. The Reagan doctrine is we win, they lose, so they're not going to just lose in Russia, they need to lose in Central America as well. The rise of the Sandinistas, a left-wing militant group led by Daniel Ortega, who will eventually take power as the president of Nicaragua. I believe he's still in power in Nicaragua. He came back to power some years ago. Will create a communist government there. Reagan absolutely hates having a country this close to the United States with open communist ties, and so he is going to do everything in his power to prevent communism from spreading in Central America. This is going to be resurrecting the mistake of the domino theory of communism has to be stopped wherever, like in Vietnam. Reagan's not going to invade the country like he did Grenada in 1983 to prevent that island nation from becoming a communist government, but he is going to break the rules. Reagan's Congress said that they would not give any more support to the counter-revolutionaries, who are right-wing revolutionaries in Nicaragua called the Contras. By the way, Reagan, throughout his presidency, had to deal with a Democratic House and Senate. Unlike FDR, who had the Democrats fully in lockstep with him and a huge supermajority, Reagan is dealing with a House of Representatives and a Senate that has been controlled by the Democrats for 35 years. Reagan will make good friends with the House Minority Leader, Tip O'Neill. Obviously, one thing that I forgot to mention that does boost Reagan's popularity and sympathy with the American people and with the Democrats and even with O'Neill himself is Reagan is the first U.S. president to survive being shot while he is president. In fact, he's the only U.S. president to be shot while he is in office and survive. He is shot at the very beginning of his presidency in March of 1981. The nation rallies around him, and it allows him actually to use some political clout and sympathy to promote his agenda. Fast forward 6 years. I needed to mention that. I would have felt bad if I hadn't mentioned that. Yes, and 3 presidents have been shot and survived: Reagan, Trump, and Theodore Roosevelt. He's the only one to be shot in office and actually survive his shooting. So Reagan, what happens next? Sorry, blanking. Back to the Iran-Contra scandal. Reagan had helped secure, at least through intimidation, the release of the hostages from Iran. Obviously, Jimmy Carter had worked overtime to get this done, but right before Reagan became president, the Iranian hostages had come home, so Reagan had started his presidency with a political victory that he kind of stole from Jimmy Carter, but that doesn't matter because it's all about optics and the, cult of personality and the what I said before, the ability to be the great communicator, the charm or the slickness of Ronald Reagan. Reagan, obviously, the United States had sanctions on Iran. They did not want Iran to have any weapons. Iran was an existential threat to Israel. They had condemned the United States. They considered the United States the great Satan. Reagan kind of throws this over the hill to purchase weapons through Saudi middlemen from Iran and give them to the Contras secretly. This creates a huge scandal because they weren't supposed to arm the Contras, and they certainly weren't supposed to arm the Contras with weapons that come from America's newest enemy in the Middle East, Iran. This is a huge issue for the Reagan administration. This really hurts the administration, and eventually one of Reagan's subordinates, a man named Oliver North, I think he went to prison for basically saying that it was his idea, and Reagan doesn't get named, although it's very clear that Reagan, with a wink and a nod, had allowed his Secretary of State, his National Security Advisor, and the head of the CIA to make these military deals with the Saudis as the middleman, with the Iranians, in order to purchase weapons and give them to the Contras. By the way, some relevance for today directly. One of the Saudi middlemen, who was a weapons dealer who got the weapons from the Iranians, and was a man, I forget his name, but he was one of his associates who helped funnel his money and launder it, was a man named Jeffrey Epstein. So Epstein goes back, yes, to the 80s during the Iran-Contra scandal. So Reagan, I've been talking about it all the time. Reagan was not a progressive horse. So Reagan's good intention did indeed lead to hell for his administration, and it's one of the biggest scandals in the 20th century for a U.S. president. It hurt his prestige, but it's interesting, 1988, despite the Iran-Contra, despite the AIDS crisis, despite the economy starting to flounder a little bit, Reagan is still remarkably popular. And Reagan is so popular that his handpicked successor is his vice president, George H.W. Bush. Bush becomes the first sitting vice president to be elected president since 1836. Reagan's huge personality, like that of Andrew Jackson helping Martin Van Buren, seems to give George H.W. Bush what many people consider to be Reagan's third term. Reagan leaves office in 1989. That same year, the Berlin Wall comes down, the Cold War starts to come to an end, satellite states of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact start to get their independence, and by 1991, thanks to continual pressure from the Bush administration and Moscow politics overthrowing the old guard fighting with the young guard, the Soviet Union starts to fall apart, the Cold War comes to an end, Mikhail Gorbachev is eventually forced out of power, and Russia eventually picks a more liberal communist who basically is a liberal Democrat, Boris Yeltsin, to become the first democratically elected president of the Russian Federation as the Soviet Union totally collapses and many of its satellite states go free. Now, how much that has to do with Reagan has been up to debate for a long time, but a renewed amount of pressure, new intentions of holding the Soviet Union accountable helped Reagan, and then later Bush put more and more pressure on the Gorbachev government to work with them. This pressure undermined Gorbachev's influence in the Kremlin and eventually led to him being couped, returned to power, and then overthrown completely, resigning at the end of 1991. Reagan sees all of this and sees these as huge wins for democracy and freedom, and George H.W. Bush continues his legacy of being involved in international conflicts and tries to create a new world order. This is what the Desert Storm and all of that. Now, this part is sad. Reagan, we've talked about his imperfections, we've talked about his problems. Now we need to talk about his health. There have been rumors for a long time, and I have not necessarily confirmed them one way or the other, and I've been reading back and forth because it's considered to be fact, but it's not fully factual, at least not confirmed fact, that Ronald Reagan was struggling with Alzheimer's disease at the end of his presidency. Reagan was elected in 1980 with many people knowing that he was the oldest president in U.S. history. He turned 70 just after his presidency began. By the way, he's one of 4 presidents born in February, but he's not celebrated officially during President's Day. Reagan was 77 when he left the White House. He was 73 when he was reelected, despite the fact that many people were already starting to worry about his age then. This was in an era when people did not live into their 70s as much as they do today. Now a lot of people think 80 is the new 70 and all of that sort of stuff. Reagan has health problems. Obviously, he's been shot. There's issues about Reagan's health. And people are starting to report that Reagan is falling asleep. He's forgetting things. He's not really vibing the way he vibed during his first term by 1987, 1988. The second term drowsiness, the senioritis of the presidency is a real thing for presidents when they get into the last couple of years of their administration. Didn't really happen to George W. Bush because his administration crashed and burned in his last couple of years. It didn't really happen to Barack Obama because of the Trump election, but it has happened to 2-term presidents where their second part, the latter part of their second term is kind of resting on laurels and trying to just finish so they can get out and thinking about their legacy and doing the last coat of paint on their legacy. But Reagan's health issues are a concern to a lot of people in his administration as they get close to 1988 and 1989. So it has never been actually medically confirmed, but there have been a lot of rumors and a lot of theories and a lot of inclinations to believe that Reagan did indeed have Alzheimer's disease at the end of his presidency. In 1990, Reagan starts to struggle with memory. And in 1994, him and his wife write a letter expressing their deepest sincerity for the support from the American people as these rumors have intensified, and do confirm that Ronald Reagan does happen to have Alzheimer's. And yes, Stryker, thank you for mentioning that. The Challenger disaster also happened during Reagan when the Challenger blew up in mid-space, them knowing full well that it probably would do so. But Reagan's health is obviously a huge issue. He has Alzheimer's near the end of his, might have had Alzheimer's near the end of his presidency, and he became very clear about his Alzheimer's in the mid 1990s. Now, this is 6 years after he's left, 5 years after he's left the presidency, but the rumors are swirling everywhere, and Reagan doesn't really go out in public much after that. His mind is clearly going. But it's one of the most, I've read the letter, and I have to admit, from a personal standpoint, it's an extremely touching sentiment that someone would be willing to express their love to their family, to their people, to their country after serving them, regardless of the politics, regardless of what you think of Ronald Reagan's legacy. I think it's a level of transparency that's quite fascinating, and really a huge political risk, but Reagan was willing to do that. And this is with many presidents having struggled with all sorts of different ailments during their presidencies. Perhaps Reagan, like Chester Arthur, FDR, Joe Biden, and others, kept his health secret from the public in many ways. And perhaps that's true, but the transparency is quite touching to see. Reagan will struggle with this for the next 10 years. He will pass away in 2004. At the time of his death, he is the oldest president in U.S. history, soon to be passed up by Gerald Ford. And then, of course, Jimmy Carter, who will live to be 100. But yes, so Reagan dies in 2004. Nancy lives, I think, until 2016. I think she's 95 when she dies. The Reagans, and that's the passing of Ronald Reagan, but his legacy has certainly not passed away. Reagan remains the bedrock for how Republican conservatives have viewed themselves for the last 40 years. Reagan inspired an entire generation of people to swing to the right, to embrace Republican and conservative policies. He revitalized the conservative movement. He revitalized Republicanism. You cannot tell the story of the right wing in American history without Ronald Reagan. The conservatism that he inspired, which is a blend of economic and neoconservatism with foreign intervention, has become a little out of date amongst Republicans as of late, but it's extremely influential on the presidents, especially the Republican presidents that came after. A lot of people consider his economic policies to be formative for the libertarian movement in the United States, despite the fact that Reagan was no libertarian himself. Libertarians predated Reagan's rise to presidential power, but many libertarian ideas of cutting government spending and cutting regulations and cutting social programs did indeed happen during Reagan's presidency, when it was unthinkable for Carter, Ford, or Nixon to do it before him. The Republicans seemingly have despite not having control of Congress, Reagan's bipartisanship was able to get a lot of his agenda through. His warmness, his likability made him popular with Republicans and Democrats alike. The legacy of Reagan's presidency has been hurt by the results of what a lot of people see as the shrinking of the middle class. Reagan also is the one who basically closed down, deprioritized an emphasis on mental health, and this has led to many mental health crises. The economic inequality grew under Reagan significantly and continues to grow, many people believe, as a result of his policies. This has disproportionately affected people of color. It has also disproportionately affected the poor. It has led to a wider chasm between the rich, who made more and more money and more wealth with less and less taxation and regulations hanging over their heads during his administration. This has led to huge criticisms of Reagan, especially in modern culture. His interventions in certain areas, especially in Central America, as well as the Iran-Contra scandal, have dampened his successes against the Soviet Union near the end of the Cold War. A lot of people do not believe Reagan is responsible for the end of the Cold War. So there's obviously some mixed bag here. There's obviously a lot of things to criticize Reagan for. The Reagan administration's war is one of the first administrations to really begin the war on drugs, of his wife Nancy promoting the Just Say No campaign. This obviously led to criminal prosecution against people disproportionately of color. People who also were just possessing drugs were heavily targeted. This has hurt different communities in different ways. So Reagan's administration does have a lot of people look back on a presidency, especially a presidency that ended only 36 years ago, and has a lot of scars on it and a lot of problems with it. It might be a gelatinous blob that has a beautiful face on in the front of it, a mask that it's wearing to make it look good when it's really not as good as you might think, or it might actually be a pretty impressive presidency with some real markings to indicate that it really had its problems. It's up to you to determine that based on the facts. And again, Reagan's legacy will change over the next 20 years because people are continually assessing his impact on the conservative movement, on the economy, and of course on America. So that's Ronald Reagan. That's his life, his legacy, his presidency, all of that different stuff. I tried to touch on as much as I possibly could. I couldn't talk about everything. It took me 55 minutes because we had about a minute to start. And I did everything. I was trying to be as friendly to Reagan as possible as I was trying to be friendly to FDR. I'm not a huge FDR fan. My personal perspective, I put Reagan just on the outside of the top 5. I think slaying the Soviet beast is a huge thing that a lot of people really, I think he deserves a lot of credit for. I don't think he was perfect. I think there's a lot to dislike about Reagan. And I understand why people have that. I think that I understand where Reagan was coming from on a lot of the things that he did. I mean, Reagan's, the irony is, as much as I talked about FDR and his race record, Reagan's race record isn't great either. It's better than FDR's. Reagan is the president who made MLK Day a national holiday. But Reagan and unemployment numbers, things like that, the economy was pretty good when it was good for everybody. In the mid-'80s, especially late 80s, it starts to trickle a little bit. But that's what's going on there. So yeah. Yeah. that's basically all we can do with, that's what I'm going to say about Ronald Reagan. I'm not going to go too much into detail in defending my opinion one way or another, but that's my basic perspective. I hope you enjoyed what I talked about. I'll stay for about 10 more minutes and take any questions you might have about Reagan, about his presidency, about anything else you want to talk about regarding history or social studies. Please be sure to follow us on those social media handles if you haven't, and please like the live if you haven't already. Really appreciate all of that. Let's see. I'm just looking at the chat and what we have here. Let's see if anyone has any questions. Did you see when Ronald Reagan stood without any platform in the Bronx and spoke to the black people there? No, I haven't seen that before. Reagan was awesome, but thanks for your goofy perspective. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. People love FDR. I don't love FDR. I do like Reagan, but I do understand why people don't like Reagan. And as a historian, it's my job to understand why people don't like Reagan and what Reagan did that has had deleterious and positive impacts on America. Ozzy's saying Jimmy Carter was a good man but a horrible president. A lot of people think that. A lot of people, especially on the right, think that Reagan was the good president, Carter was the good person. Close to burning his fingers. Reagan has zero reasons to be in politics. I think he did pretty well as a politician. I think he did. I think to go from that stage to the other end, to use what you had learned as an actor to basically be able to influence people, it's pretty impressive. And you know, he didn't have the clout and the name recognition and the political background of an FDR, but he had been the governor of a large estate. He did have a reputation. He was really likable. He was a good speaker. That helped him a lot. Yeah. Led to increased drug intake. Probably. I'm not sure if just say no led to more drug intake. When you say no to something, people want it more, though. Exxon Valdez spill. Yeah, that happened during his presidency. I can't talk about every single thing. Where was Exxon Valdez? I don't know a huge amount about it. And I am not Kylo Ren. Republicans only want people with charm to become president. Okay. I don't understand that at all. When you consider that some Republican presidents have included Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Calvin Coolidge, charm is not something Republicans always do well. People just say that because of Reagan. The problem is they make decisions without suffering the consequences of bad decisions, so they greenlit Challenger knowing about its failures. Yeah, it was a terrible idea. Of course he had Alzheimer's because he didn't use much of his brain. His wife isn't ever plane crashing without taking it. This is a problem with politics. Okay, then. Yeah. Yeah, Manu. Okay, I'm just looking at arguments in the chat. Do we have questions? Reagan did not raise one penny to the minimum salary between 1981 and 1989. No, and most presidents do not. Raising the minimum wage is not something presidents run on. It's not something presidents do, especially for the federal government, Fernando. Wages went up during the Reagan administration. The stagflation kind of went the way of a dodo bird, but no, raising the minimum wage is not something Republican presidents especially do. Yeah. Alaska. Thank you, Ozzy, for that. I've heard about that. Yeah. Excuse me. Reagan targeted the Department of Education, but was never able to really defang it like he wanted. He wanted to remove certain governmental departments. So the total annual tuition and fees for residents were $630. Really? Is that interesting, Steve? That's interesting, Steve. I didn't know if it was. I don't know if Reagan had anything to do with making costs lower in universities. Let me see here. Okay, does anyone have any questions? History, social studies, Reagan, anything? Criticism about Reagan and his administration. He destroyed unions. He closed the mental hospitals. Yes, he did. There's more he didn't do right. In my opinion, Trump worse, Reagan number 2. You're entitled to your opinion. They are wrong opinions. Reagan is not considered to be the worst president or second worst president. I mean, the idea that Trump is the worst president when we still don't know 3.5 years of his presidency is completely unfair to me. I'm not even going to say anything about when I ranked the presidents, I did not say anything about Biden or Trump. And I hesitated to say anything about Obama. It's so soon after his presidency ended, it was almost unfair for me to say anything. Biden's presidency has been over for 6 months, and there's still more to learn. I didn't know when I made that list about Biden covering up the fact that he had cancer when he was in the White House. So I can't say much about that. Oh, Reagan raised the cost of that. Well, that's not good. The bombing of Rainbow Warrior in Auckland Harbor by the French. Micronesia gaining its independence, whilst vast areas of French Polynesia becoming an island declared nuked beyond repair. Interesting. Thank you for telling me about that. But do you agree, Friendly History, that Reagan can be a number 3 president? That is where he is. No, Reagan is not a top 3 president. You can't. I understand where you're coming from. I understand why people like Reagan. Reagan, I said it before. He's probably my 6th man. It's tough for me, and I mean, this is coming with how much I love Eisenhower and Truman. Reagan has his problems, to be sure, and I think it's tough. Reagan said he would make better policies for air traffic controllers, work situation after winning, and after winning, zero care was given to the ATC. Yes, presidents don't keep all of their promises. I think that what I don't like hearing, and it's the same thing with FDR, is presidents not keeping all of their promises. When people criticize a president for just doing what a president usually does, that really doesn't make any sense to me. Very few presidents keep all of their promises. Do you think Trump will sue South Park for their new show? No. I don't really care. I think it's dumb. And I think it's a grown man complaining about a cartoon. And the cartoon is just pandering for money anyways. And if I had to have three options for a president for the people of America, it would have to be Coolidge, McKinley, and Reagan. I understand where you're coming from. That's definitely the conservative position on that. If I were a conservative and I were to pick my three presidents, it would be McKinley, Reagan, and Coolidge. But yeah, if you're getting Trump president in 2016 and 2020, that's 4 years and 8 months now. Yes, and Trump is president right now. So I have to, just like I judge Grover Cleveland on both of his terms, I have to do the same thing for Trump, Maudine. Reagan hated black people. I really don't think that's true. I mean, I don't see any evidence of it. I didn't even say FDR hated black people when he refused to pass anti-lynching legislation. I give a context of why he did it. Why do most red states residents confuse Anne Frank with Helen Keller? Because they don't watch this channel. I've talked about both of those women. He was never to be a president. Just because he was a good actor, he banked on it to take a shot. That's not true, Manu. That's just not true. He used that, to be sure, but that's not why he became president. Who do you think three presidents would be good to live under? Theodore Roosevelt, Washington, and Lincoln. Those are the three best presidents. I don't think number 4, Thomas Jefferson, is close. That's, for me, it's an S tier, A tier thing. Do you think the Einstein list disappeared? The Einstein list? It isn't true. You're stating an opinion about politics, about political power, and how he rose to political power that has no evidence, has some evidence, but not a lot of evidence for it. You're giving an opinion. During the Mexican Revolution, do you think President Diaz was being forceful or reactive? Is that Porfirio Diaz? Probably pretty reactive, given the fact that he had been in power for decades. Why would reps pick him? Maybe because they think he'd be a good presidential candidate. I mean, they picked Ford. They picked Ford to be their nominee in '76. Ford wasn't an actor. Nixon was a terrible TV actor. If you look at what he did on Laugh-In. Republicans don't just pick people for their presidential position, for their celebrity. That's just not true. That's like me saying, oh, the Democrats only picked Kennedy because he was good looking. What about Kennedy, Drax? What do you want to talk about with Kennedy? So you would like to live under Abraham Lincoln's policies in most instances, especially when he is in a war. A little weird. Homestead Act. Great idea. Transcontinental Railroad. Great idea. Lincoln's domestic agenda, if it had been separated from the war, would have been incredibly good. If the South hadn't seceded and the Civil War hadn't happened, Lincoln would have been a fantastic president domestically. Why can actors become presidents? Because anyone who's born in this country can become a president. Didn't you hear about the telephone conversation between Reagan and Nixon? Don't forget Reaganomics. I haven't heard. Reaganomics was not targeted at anyone racially. Cool. I haven't heard the phone call. I'll have to look into that. But yes, Reagan, you do know, cool, that Reagan was the president. If you're going to mention one incident, I'm going to mention an actual legislation. Reagan is the one that made MLK Day a national holiday. I agree with you. Good president's list. Smart young man. You do try to be fair. I'm a 74-year-old female set in ways. I must say your knowledge. I appreciate that. That's very sweet of you, Maudine. I'm glad you're here, and I appreciate your perspective on Ronald Reagan, regardless of if I disagree with it or not. Do you think the Jeffrey Epstein list disappeared? Okay. Jeez. People want me to talk about Epstein again. All right. Here's what I'll say about Epstein. From what I mentioned him, so I guess it's fair game. We have to be very clear in how we talk about this crap. And I'm saying it's crap because it's just all over the place, and I'm tired of talking about it. And I think Epstein is a disgusting human being, but I'm getting to the point where I hear about it all the darn time that I'm almost like Trump and wanting to say, are we still talking about Jeffrey Epstein, which is one of the dumbest things he's ever said, and that's saying something for Trump. Yes, I'm being very opinionated there. That was dumb and stupid of him to say, especially when all of his base was demanding the Epstein files when he ran on releasing them. Here's the point. There are different factors to here. You do not have a client list in the sense of Epstein has a list of people. You may have a black book that we don't know what that looks like. From what I understand of what I have read about it, the Epstein files, some of which have already been released, like the flight logs. So you can know about who was involved in the flights from what was released previously. Then you have the list of the files of what Epstein did personally, and those files may indicate certain people. Those people are the ones who we keep saying are on the list. Those people may have indicated in relationship to him as someone who knew him, someone who was a friend of his, somebody who did business with him, somebody who was implicit in his activity or explicit in his activity. We don't know. So when you talk about a client list or anything like that, we don't know actually who those people are and how much criminal activity they have involved in that. We know certain people have had involvements with Epstein and are named in the files. President Trump is one of them. There's also, of course, Prince Andrew, there's Bill Clinton, there's a lot of people that Epstein clearly associated with who are going to be named in those files who have some sort of a familiarity with him one way or another. Let's not forget something about Epstein. He was one of the biggest investors in politics in his time. He donated to both Republicans and Democrats. He never donated to Trump. He was a Democrat politically. He donated to the Clinton Foundation. He donated to John Kerry. He's had associations with Democrats and Republicans, and like many very rich people, he has tried to use his power and influence to push them one way or another. That doesn't mean that anyone that I just mentioned was involved in the disgusting, horrifying acts that Jeffrey Epstein committed. My point is, I don't think that they have been doctored necessarily. I just think there's a possibility that it was doctored, but I think that's conspiratorial at this point. So, there you go. I take a political compass test. No, I will do a video at some point where I say who I would vote for in every election up to 2016. So if you want to know how I would have voted 30 years ago and want to form my opinions based on that, then go with that. But you're going to be disappointed because I'm going to vote for both Republicans and Democrats. Let me see here. Do you think putting the WWE in charge of the Department of Education is a good idea? He didn't do that. He put the wife of a guy from the WWE. And yeah, I mean, it shows a carelessness because Trump really doesn't care about the Department of Education. They don't want the Department of Education. Trump wants to make good on Reagan's promise and get rid of it. Friendly, wasn't a bunch of stuff going on in Nicaragua in the 80s? Yes. You have the Sandinistas, who are the communist sympathizing left-wing group that rises to power with Daniel Ortega. They are opposed by the counter-revolutionaries, literally called the Contras, who Reagan armed by giving money to the Iranians. Yes. So are you saying that Pam is lying to us by saying there was a list on her desk? She said the files were on her desk. I don't know if she's lying. She really doesn't look good. She didn't offer clarity. There needs to be some sort of explanation. I'm not giving her the benefit of the doubt. I think people do get their wires crossed on this and thinking that the files are the same thing as the list, and the list is just a list of people, like there's 50 people who are bad Epstein people. That's not exactly how it works. You can compile a list of names based off of who is in the files. So the files may mention this person had this association with Epstein and used Epstein to procure this amount of money, and Epstein in return brought him to his island, and I'm not even going to go farther, and that person would be on the list, technically speaking. So when people say Trump is on the list, that's not the same thing as saying he's in the files. He's in the files because he had associations with Epstein going back for decades, as did huge other amounts of people. And I'm not saying that it's beyond me that the President of the United States could be on one of Epstein's clients and have done horrible, despicable things. It's very possible. But people who are immediately jumping to that prove to me that they don't care about the truth. They just hate Donald Trump. And it's okay to hate Donald Trump. Plenty of people hate Donald Trump. Maybe I hate Donald Trump, but I'm going to at least wait to see what happens. So list files, the list could be in the files, but it's not going to, you're not necessarily going to get, unless Ghislaine Maxwell is right and there's a black book, you're not going to get a name of every single person with a blackmail file. Unless we find, you're going to go through the files and you're going to find names, and some of those names will be innocuous, some of those will be hearsay, like Trump is hearsay. And who knows how much fervor he goes into him. But there's other people as well. So there you go. List is obviously inside the file. It's not a list. It is there are names that are there. There could be a list, but what we know for sure is you can compile a list based off of people who are named in the file who did the despicable deeds with Jeffrey Epstein. Was George III a villain or just a monarch trying to hold overseas territory? Did he even have direct involvement in the American Revolution? Both. I'm going to go with the both. Yes, he was trying to hold on to his overseas territories. From the American frustration with him is that he represented the British government as the head of state. Yeah. Pam might be protecting the swamp creatures. I don't know. I just don't know. I think she has had horrible optics. She's done a terrible job of facilitating and explaining this. Trump does himself no favors by running around saying this is a Democratic hoax. I think that he has gotten credibility from his side, especially for doing that, because he has been able to basically point the finger at the Democrats for a long time and blame them for a bunch of things. And sometimes he happens to be right. Hold off on releasing those hostages until after the election. I've got a deal for you, Ronald Reagan. Yep, that sounds like what Reagan would do. Reagan was responsible for war crimes in Central and South America and the original Robin Hood in reverse. Interesting. I don't fully buy that. I'm not surprised. The U.S. has did a lot of war crimes allowed and perpetuated a lot of crimes in both South and in Central America and Africa during the Cold War. Let me see here. Actors and celebrities are the worst people to be president. Who's the best person to be president? Because Lincoln had almost zero experience when he became president. Eisenhower was a general. Washington was a general with no political savvy. Some of the best people are not politicians. And some of the worst presidents are the most experienced politicians, like James Buchanan. Yeah, so there we go. I think I finally caught up to the chat. Does anyone else have anything they want to say? I agree. The list doesn't mean a president is a pedophile. Darn, I shouldn't have said that. I also agree both Democrats and Republicans visited Epstein's island. Pictures continue to go. Yeah, to be perfectly fair, I think that's an extremely fair perspective, Madine. I have no idea, and I don't know if it means Bill Clinton or Trump or Al Gore or the Bushes or John Kerry. I think a lot of people just want to see a problem and solve it. So Friendly, can you please do a political compass test? No, I'm not going to do a political compass test. This is not a political channel. I talk about it in its relation to a historical context. And let me say one more thing about the Epstein thing to give it a historical context. People have wanted to believe for a very long time that the world is controlled by a cabal of players who make all of the decisions behind closed doors in secret societies, and then that turns into something outside. And is that going on? Probably in many circumstances. Does that mean that Jeffrey Epstein was a foreign agent who worked for Mossad, MI6, RSV, or China, or the United States, or any one of these conglomerates, organizing a blackmail file of all the world's biggest leaders so that he could take them down, showing them doing horrifying acts to children and doing all sorts of other stuff and laundering money to terrible organizations and terrible people that do horrible things to other human beings for the sake of pleasure, greed, and power? I don't know. I think that's a big leap in logic. I'm not saying it's disproven. I'm just saying that I have no idea. I don't buy the extremes on either of us. I don't buy that Jeffrey Epstein was just this debauched, disgusting individual who just was acting almost alone and just happened to know really rich and wealthy and powerful people. And I don't buy on the opposite end that this is some sort of giant conspiracy theory. I also don't buy the extremist idea that the Biden administration created this or doctored it all up. There might have been some of that going on. I don't know what the Biden administration did with the Epstein files. They didn't even have access with them until January of 2024 when Maxwell was convicted. So, hey, Vincent, good to see you. Elon said Bill Gates is on. I don't care what Elon says. If Elon knows who's on, I don't care what people say if this person's on the list or that person's on the list. If Elon knows who's on the list, then just release who he knows and just say this person's on the list and they did this and that. Show your knowledge. How would Elon know this? I am a pilot and I don't know what they are talking about when they say Trump was on the passenger list heading out towards Epstein's island. Trump's last flight with Epstein was a year before Epstein bought the island. Does that exonerate Trump from horrifying, despicable actions? Not necessarily. But to say Trump was on the island is not true. And this is coming from somebody who constantly criticizes Trump. I am not trying to defend him. I am only from people who are just I mean, some of the opinions I hear about Epstein are just some of the most ridiculous nonsense from both sides that just make me facepalm all the time. And here's an incredible idea for all of us going forward. And this is what I just asked for with Ronald Reagan. Patience. Let's wait and see what the fallout. Reagan left office 36 years ago. He died 20 years ago. Let's see the fallout of his policies, his decisions, and his ideas, and how they continually impact this world before we make a definitive claim one way or another. And if we're not willing to do that, and we're not even willing to wait a month. It's not been a month since Bondi said there was no list. The July memo that leaked on July 6th. It's been it's 3 weeks, 3 weeks ago. And we're all freaking out about this. I know it's important. I know it's crazy. I know it bolds all sorts of interesting ideas. And a lot of people want this juicy apple of, I'm going to get full transparency for my government. Let me tell you one thing. I can guarantee one thing is true above all else that I've told you today. You are never going to get full transparency from your government. You may get 75%. But if you want full transparency or you're going to quit the Trump train, I have bad news for you. You're going to need to stop taking trains altogether because you clearly don't have the intelligence to buy a train ticket. You're never going to get full transparency from your government. It's not going to happen. It has never happened in human history. Who knows how much transparency you will get? And I have a fantastic idea. Let's just wait and see what is happening with those files. And if we can wait if we can wait to look at a president for years after and see what his legacy fully is, which I hope we can do, we can wait at least a month to finally come up with some ideas about Epstein, because a lot has been revealed and it's only been 3 weeks of this scandal. And social media are easy access to information, rumors running around. It's so much easier than it was during Iran-Contra, for instance, to get information and go with it. I don't think any scandal or any war, any president would have survived any scandal or any war, or any mismanagement of a war had X and social media existed. Can you imagine how Dresden would have been reported and what happened there, which was awful to say the least. But you couldn't have been able to continue the war after that. So, anyways. The Epstein files, Trump was found in them. What does that mean, though? As I've said repeatedly, it doesn't mean anything. He did anything wrong. And I'm not saying that, to exonerate him. I am saying, what does that mean? I'm looking at what that actually entails. There are tons of people mentioned in the files who are probably not guilty of anything. And the list is not the same thing as the files. All right, then, do you lean more 20th century progressive or conservative? I'm not going to answer where my political affiliations are. Carter was the most incompetent president in terms of Iranian Middle Eastern politics. Region was in the aspect he wouldn't let them down the Shah. That's very true, cool. And today is the death anniversary of that Shah, who was forced to come to the United States. Bill Gates' wife confirmed that Bill Gates was a frequent flyer on the Lolita Express. Oh, Lord, I wish we wouldn't call it that, because that's so jejune. I've heard that before. I don't know what it means. I sleep better at night thinking that the President of the United States, the founder of Microsoft, and Tom Hanks did not do anything to children beyond hugging them, handshaking them, or signing an autograph to them. I really sleep better at night. 75% would be a 70% increase in transparency. Absolutely. 100%. Do I as an American, as a Westerner, want more transparency? Absolutely. Do governments do well when they're more transparent? I think that the people like them more. But we're not going to get that transparency. The United States has been, for 60 years, publicly losing its transparent access since the Gulf of Tonkin, and it really happened way before that. I mean, the government, in some ways, and I'll say this, governments can't be transparent about everything. What's going on in Los Alamos, President Roosevelt? We're building a nuclear bomb to blow up cities. Do you think that would have gotten anywhere if the Germans had known about this in 1943? Sometimes, especially when it comes to the president's job as commander-in-chief in the U.S., and this happens all over the world with all sorts of different governments, you can't be fully transparent. It's actually better to not be fully transparent. Have you heard what Maxwell said? I've heard back and forth of what she's said. I don't know. I don't want to trust somebody who engages in that. I want to know and verify it from multiple sources. I've heard that she said there's a black book. I don't know what that looks like. That might be the list the client list that we're all talking about. Yeah, that's exactly how Iranians feel about the Shah. He was an SOB, but he was our SOB. CNN and MSNBC are already saying that Maxwell is not to be believed, so we already know that she won't be pointing the finger at Trump. Well, a lot of people feel that Trump is, by giving her limited immunity, that the Trump administration is getting ready to pardon her so that she will point the finger at Democrats and exonerate Trump, and Trump will get away with it, because they are the ones now blackpilling about the idea of a transparent government when it was the Republicans doing it for years before. And it's all this watchdog thing where the party in the minority has conspiratorial ideas about the party in the majority. It has happened all throughout American history. It's no surprise here that the media that runs cover and is more left-leaning for the Democrats will indeed say stuff like that. I don't trust Maxwell either, though, and I understand why they say that, but I also know there's a political weight to what they are saying that I don't have. Please watch my news segments. I do this every day. I talk about the Epstein scandal and stuff like that. I'm going to make a video about the Epstein scandal because it's a presidential scandal. It has historical implications. It might be the worst presidential scandal in history. I don't think it is, but so I talk about the stuff. I go into detail, and I'm willing to discuss it with people. But I'm not going to just politique about it all the time. I don't trust this woman. She's a disgusting human being. This is not a hero. I understand why she wants a pardon. I understand why they gave her limited immunity. They didn't give her a limited immunity to exonerate Trump because Trump's in on all of it. That's nonsensical. They gave her limited immunity so that she could testify without further prosecution because there are more crimes she clearly engaged in and Epstein clearly engaged in. That, I think we're taking baby steps towards actually getting what the heck actually happened with Jeffrey Epstein. And I doubt, and I think that heads are going to roll and people are going to get fired, and one of them might be the President of the United States, and it might not be because he's involved in it, but it might be because of how he's handled it. Will you cover King Edward's abdication to Mary Wallace, the American, their appearance hanging out with Hitler and the Nazis, Henry Ford overseeing German military jeep and tank engineering before war broke out? Yeah, Henry Ford was very sympathetic to the Nazis until FDR went to him, offered him a bunch of money to build up American manufacturing, and then Ford helped produce tanks and other military equipment that destroyed the German Wehrmacht. Yeah, Edward VIII was king in 1936. He abdicated to marry an American divorcee, and then they started hanging out with the Nazis. They lived in Paris until they died. So, yeah, that sounds like, yep, Julianne, that's definitely true. No, but the Iranians, a lot of Iranians, especially those in the United States, have a high opinion of the Shah and his family and wish they were in power rather than the Islamic Republic. TDS is at play. They want it to be true to have tunnel vision. So many of the list are protected. It's possible. I mean, I don't know. I see a lot of liberals and Democrats willing to say, yeah, if Bill Clinton's on it, send him to prison. And if Trump is on it, in that capacity. They never explain in that capacity what that actually means. Because being on the list doesn't mean you're this or that. But they are willing to say, yeah, Bill Clinton should go to prison. John Kerry should go to prison. President Trump should go to prison. I'm firmly fine with that. Cleaning house. It's that meme where it's like, if you do this, you will destroy all of our government institutions. And it's the guy who says, your terms are acceptable, you know. Everyone has to remember Donald Trump brought the rights to the Miss Universe contest in the late 80s or the early 90s and was starting that his relationship with Epstein. That's a correlative argument. Trump and Epstein knew each other because they both rose to prominence economically and financially in the 1980s. As part of that Reagan revolution economically was to really, really encourage the rich to make a lot more money and to build up. And so that Reagan and Trump and Epstein might be a result of that indirectly. Yes, there has. I don't know how much Trump and his Miss Universe thing has to do with Jeffrey Epstein. I really don't, James. Can I go live on Instagram? I've gone live on Instagram. I go live every Friday at 7. Yeah. Anyways, so, but yeah, thank you, Stryker and Gaiahan, for asking over stuff. Did the Roman Senate or citizens see themselves as above the law the same way our modern politicians do? The more corrupt they were, the more they saw themselves that way. The more of the patrician class became a special protected class. So yeah. Friendly_history1, that is the Instagram. So. David Duke was also very popular in the 80s. Yes, I've heard that the stupid KKK guy. Yep, I've heard the conspiracies. I've heard the ties. I don't really. Yeah, it's this. I've heard that for years. He had more of a political base in Louisiana. I think he's from Louisiana than it was economic. But so, all right. I'll take one more question, and then we got to wrap it up because I got things to do. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the Ronald Reagan stuff. I hope you enjoyed that lecture. I really enjoyed giving it to you. We'll see what we do next week. It might be the Bolsheviks. It might be U.S. immigration. We might do something else. We'll see what the topic could possibly be. So, did you agree with Ronald Reagan closing asylums back in the 80s? LMAO. Why do you have to put LMAO? I don't say what I agree with or disagree with. I don't know why Reagan did that, but I did know that he did it, and they're actually bringing them back right now, which is weird. Are you more progressive or conservative economically? Not going to answer it. Keep asking, and you're not going to get any answers. I don't share my political, religious, or personal beliefs about certain issues. I will share my opinion when I can apply a historical or geopolitical perspective to it. And its importance, when I see historical significance, I'll share my perspective. I'm willing to share opinions on obvious things like Hitler was evil and Epstein is disgusting, but yeah, you're not gonna find out which way I vote, if I vote at all. Who produced more milk, Nancy Reagan or Barbara Bush? What? I'm glad you're on YouTube, brother. You bring knowledge and concise historical points. I always love the content, and I always love having you here. Thank you so much, Stryker. I thought Obama closed the insane asylums. I don't know what Obama did about insane asylums. Who do you think truly assassinated Kennedy? Good question, Sheila, and welcome. I don't think it was Oswald. Again, opinion, but a historical one. I don't think it was Oswald. I think that there's just too much evidence suggesting other things being involved. And I think the CIA has lied. It's been proven. George DeAndes, they knew Epstein. They knew Oswald. They had connections with Oswald. The Cuban counter-revolutionary group knew Oswald. Oswald was on their radar. And MI6 was warning about it. There's just too much there. Do you think... Thanks for teaching me some history instead of just throwing out political opinions. Always my pleasure, Julianne. Always a pleasure. I understand why people, Sheila, believe that Oswald killed Kennedy, but I know from the trajectory, Epstein, gosh. Oswald was a good shot. He wasn't that good, is what I'm saying. From the school bank depository, killing Kennedy at that angle would have been really, really hard. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not an expert in all of it, but I have heard several experts say that. I know I'm giving hearsay, but that's why I don't really think that. And I appreciate in no way affiliated. You are the best. Good to see you. A 70% improvement on government transparency if we could get to 75%. We'll be and I think in the West especially, even in the West. I mean, in the Middle East and in the East, it's even less likely. But in the West, where we think we have transparency, 50% transparency is probably too much to ask for. Do you think that taking your own life should be made illegal? Like punishing family members for somebody in their family who is clearly struggling with mental issues, taking their own life? Absolutely not. That's the only way it could be made illegal. I mean, if you take your own life, then you're not going to get punished. I mean, come on. Since you are a liberal Muslim, how do you feel about Gaza? I love when people guess what I am. I think that children starving is awful and the war should end immediately. I've said this for a year. What will Maxwell do now? I have no idea. I just don't know what's going to happen next. This is such a roller coaster, and it needs to end. It's been going on for 3 weeks, and yet we're all jumping to these crazy conclusions in 3 weeks. Attempted is illegal. It is true that trying to take your life is illegal, but I don't think anyone should be punished for that. Cover Rasputin and the last Tsar and Tsarina. Now that's a topic that would be a lot of fun. That's going to be in my Bolsheviks one though. So you might want to vote on the channel. You can vote starting usually Fridays or Saturdays on what topic you want to see me discuss during the live lec on Sundays at 4 p.m. Eastern. And I'll finish with answering. I just don't know what's going to happen. 40% of Gazans are age 0 to 14. Yes, I'm not surprised. Their population was growing significantly before this happened. The idea that they were just being killed recklessly before October 7th is nonsense. Now they are getting killed recklessly, and it needs to stop immediately. There. That's not a controversial take or opinion. I understand. I know all of the sides here. I've seen all of it going on. I'm not going to give much more of my opinion on the issue. I think we can... if it's not obvious to you, I only give my opinions on things that are obvious. Like, killing people is bad. Killing children is really bad. Stop doing it. There. Ending the war... Great idea. I'm not going to say that that means that Israel doesn't have a right to exist or this or that. I'm not going to go into the huge political narrative behind it. I can make a moral opinion even on a current topic. So there you go. If you disagree with my opinion, I have serious questions about your moral fiber. Israel and America is helping to feed the people in Gaza now. Israel? The Americans are. I don't know about the Israelis. Careful, Mimi. Anyways, Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm going to sign off now. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, so it was worth staying an extra half hour. Usually we only go an hour, or usually we go over because people have such great questions like you guys did. Good to see all of you. Have a great week. We'll see you again Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern. Check out the daily content, and I have long-form videos dropping every Sunday at 8 p.m., every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can also follow us on TikTok at Friendly History, all of that great stuff. Always a pleasure, Striker. Always a pleasure. Give a shout out to Hars. Harry was here shortly. I didn't see him. I haven't seen him in a while, but he was debating with Hars and keeping it fun in the chat. But yes, Harry and Hars do such a great job following this channel and putting in the social media handles where you can follow me. And they're some of the best moderators I could ask for. So please show them some love and thank them. And I will see you guys later at the end of next week. Take care. Have a great week. And remember, love history.